Suri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's we've discussed doing this for a while, but I think now that we're both working from home, we're set up to rumble. So yeah, really excited to chat to you today, and run through your background and talk about a few products that I know you've worked with before.
Sure.
So for the benefit of listeners, can you tell us a bit about your career before Salesforce and kind of what got you into the Salesforce world, and then what you've been doing since, what kind of roles you've played?
So the thing is, I've been in the Salesforce world for 12 years. It's my very first gig right after my bachelor's was a Salesforce gig.
Okay.
So I started off my career as an Apex back then there was something called S Controls in Salesforce.
Sure.
Which is not there anymore. So as an Apex and S Controls developer.
Yeah.
So the only thing I've been doing for the 11 out of 12 years is Salesforce.
Okay. So you had a year out?
That 1 year I wanted to experiment something different. So I tried a gig with SAP.
Sure.
But that's really not my cup of tea because SAP was so big in Germany. I just thought I'll give it a shot, and I got into some SAP consulting.
Sure.
But with the type of things you're used to with the Salesforce platform and the flexibility,
yeah,
I felt like it was not really my thing to get into SAP. So then I got back to Salesforce after 1 year.
Sure. Yeah, we see a lot of people looking to get into the Salesforce market from SAP, but it's interesting having seen Salesforce and then going to SAP. You must have had some frustrations with how long things took to get anything done.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, as simple as spinning up a sandbox can take several days with SAP, depending on what kind of suite and product you're working on.
Yeah, it's crazy. So then,
frustrating. Yeah.
So 11 years in Salesforce. So started as a developer. Then what kind of roles have you been performing since?
Yeah, so I started off as a developer in India for 2 years. Then I moved to study in the Netherlands, after which the market was ample in Germany. So I ended up joining a consulting firm in Germany as a senior developer.
Sure.
And then after that, I slowly moved towards the consulting and architecture side. So since 2014, I've been doing architecture roles.
Yeah.
With different partners in Germany. Then I also was with Salesforce in Germany in their program architect discipline.
Sure.
Yeah, and then after almost 7 years in Germany, I decided it's time to make a move and move to Sydney 2 years ago.
Yeah, nice. So, how was it working for Salesforce? We see that a lot of people want to work for Salesforce, but having been in there and come out the other side, can you give us some insight into what it's like to be a program architect at Salesforce?
It's great. One thing is about being a program architect, and the other thing is working for Salesforce. So the company values and the work culture and everything is really amazing. I mean, the only reason I left Salesforce was because I wanted to move countries and try something new.
Yeah.
But the only con I would say with the program architect role is it's a lot of travel.
Okay.
The projects are interesting. The role is very interesting. It's an advisory role, and you get to do a lot of cool things and run initiatives and strategic initiatives and all those things. But in Sydney, it's a bit different. But in Germany, you have to travel to the customer's site almost 3 to 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on where you are, it could be like it's similar to taking a flight from Sydney to Melbourne every Monday and coming back on Thursday.
Yeah. And you're traveling not just in Germany, but you're traveling across Europe at that time.
It depends on what project you get. So I was traveling within Germany, but it's still it's 1,000 kilometers, so it's almost a 2-hour flight.
Yeah.
So doing that every week, it sort of gets onto you. But then again, if you're comfortable with the excessive travel, it's in fact worse for people in the US. I know where they are program architect based in New York, but they get a project in San Francisco.
I know.
And it's crazy.
Sure. So you've been in Australia for a couple of years. How do you find the Australian market compares to the European market?
So I mean, I can speak for the German market more than the European market in general. So the biggest difference I see in the Salesforce world is the type of industries, the verticals that use Salesforce. So in Germany, it was more heavily manufacturing, retail, healthcare, these type of customers, and automotive and so on. But Australia, I find that the government, for example, uses a lot of Salesforce, which is not the case in Germany.
Okay.
The financial services industry is also heavily using Salesforce, which is not as much.
Sure. So what would the like government departments be using in Germany? I guess you've not been there for a couple of years, but what were they using back then? Like, I guess Siebel still and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, they use Siebel and like SAP and stuff like that, more older systems that have been for longer in the market.
Sure. I think a lot of German companies seem to use SAP, right? Just because it's it's German. But yeah, it seems to be the favored system a lot of the time.
Yeah, but a lot changed in Germany after 2015 because 2015 is when Salesforce partnered with T-Mobile in Germany to set up a server in Frankfurt.
Sure.
So till then, there was a lot of, they say, the German angst around going to Salesforce because the data servers were not in Germany.
Yeah.
So complying to things like having the data in your soil and things like that, it was a problem for many customers.
Sure.
So although we had some healthcare, for example, some healthcare customers had Salesforce, but they could not store patient data in their Salesforce instance. So they had it elsewhere, and it was a little complicated until then.
Yeah, okay. So obviously you've been more recently in financial services. Do you find that a good architect can work in any industry?
I think so, because when I joined the financial services industry 10 months back, it was my first gig in the financial services industry.
Sure.
So there is a bit of a learning curve in understanding the processes and compliance and all those things.
Yeah.
But I feel if you worked in any enterprise scale project with a similar setup, different types of integrations and systems and complexity, I think it's quite easy to adapt to any kind of industry.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously we've found ourselves in kind of worrying times. The economy isn't looking great at the moment. Obviously, there's a number of reasons for that. But in times like this, obviously, people often see Salesforce as a tool to help people sell more. But obviously, there's a huge amount more to it than that. What would be your advice to companies out there that have got Salesforce? I guess to use it in the most effective way to get the most out of it in a time like this.
Yeah. So although we are going through a difficult time right now, in my project we have not paused on any Salesforce related activity.
Sure.
So I think the beauty of Salesforce is that all you need is a browser and a decent internet connection.
Yeah.
So you don't need heavy infrastructure, VPN, or I don't know, like tools especially.
Sure.
Even developers, worst case, if there's nothing else, they can develop on the developer console.
Yeah.
If they cannot install an IDE or something like that, you have the developer console. So all you need is a browser. So that itself gives the flexibility to do Salesforce implementations from anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think the initiatives can continue to progress in companies as long as there's the support from the stakeholders and the team morale is high.
Sure.
And I feel to an extent, most companies are used to the remote working setup with teams in India or Philippines.
Yeah.
So it's not alien to them to work with somebody over the screen you've never seen before.
Sure.
But just getting used to the fact that the person sitting next to you on a daily basis is now going to be on a screen in front of you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I also feel that a great example that this will work was the World Tour Reimagined, which was done by Salesforce.
Sure.
So such a thing was never done before, and a huge in-person event going completely digital.
Yeah.
That showed that, you can still continue to do things the way they are.
Sure. Did when you were working in Germany, was there much remote working then?
Yes, there was. So it really depended on the customer. So some of them were more flexible to those who had a big setup with remote teams in India or Philippines and things like that. They were open to it, but you also had smaller customers who were more like they had whoever they wanted in that building. So they were never used to the idea of even joining a video call with anyone.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And have you found, since moving to Australia, did you expect there to be more kind of remote opportunities, or do you feel that there were up until this point the kind of right balance of remote roles?
I think it's for me, the experience has been completely different depending on the customer. Mm-hmm. Because one of the projects I worked in was a similar thing where there were like 20-30 people on the project and everybody was there in the same building.
Yeah.
They didn't have the need to even talk to the colleagues from Melbourne or Queensland. So their remote working was frowned upon because it didn't really help them on a daily basis.
Sure.
But then again, in my current project, we have teams spread across India, UK, Manila and Sydney and Melbourne. So we are used to WebEx or Hangouts on a daily basis.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously the climate right now, people might be thinking, let's let's work with what we've got from a Salesforce perspective rather than making further investment in the platform.
That's right.
But there's obviously, depending on the different industries, there's obviously a lot of customer service requests coming in, or there are better ways that people can be engaging with their customers than perhaps they have historically. I know you have worked on a chatbots project before, which is an area I wanted to discuss with you, because even like this week alone, I've seen examples of where I've bought something online, and the company are massively overwhelmed with all of the orders they're getting. And they've actually turned off their phone line and they've turned off their email support. So there's no way of finding out what's going on with your product. Now, this company probably can't afford a heavy implementation of a sophisticated chatbot, but it made me think about, that there are companies out there that perhaps could invest in something like a chatbot now to improve their customer service. So can you tell us a bit about your experience with chatbots and what you did and how that was kind of approached?
Yeah, sure. So I worked on a big chatbot implementation last year. So when I say chatbots, I'm purely referring to Salesforce Einstein bots.
Sure.
There are a lot of different chatbots out there. I'll also touch on them later. But I think looking at the digital transformation happening in most companies, and in general, people want to move away from traditional support channels like phone and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So chatbots is the future of customer service because it really helps you receive immediate responses from the business or get help for repetitive tasks, like simple things like resetting your password or updating my profile or things like that, which you don't need an agent to do.
Yeah.
And I think what is good with chatbots is, with Einstein bots, is you can implement it really quickly. So I think there's one misconception that I want to clarify is chatbots is different from AI. Chatbot doesn't imply that AI is hooked up to it.
Yeah.
So you can have a chatbot without any intelligence. So it does not make it a dumb bot in the real sense. So you can have a chatbot. So when starting with the chatbot project, first thing is you got to really clearly define the capabilities of the bot, like what you want the bot to do and what type of audience it's going to cater to.
Sure.
And once you do this, you map something like the conversation flow. So all the chatbot is doing is trying to simulate a conversation, right? Like a conversation style pattern. So once you come up with this conversation design flow, as it's called, and have your capabilities, you can start building the bot right away in Einstein bots. A few clicks and you can build it up in a day or a couple of days.
Yeah. So how heavy lifting is that part, though, the whole putting the data into the system? I guess it does depend on what you want it to be able to do, right? If you want it to be an advanced piece of kit, then there's going to be more to it. But in your experience, is that something that takes a long time? And are there things that people can learn from your lessons?
Exactly. So I think the biggest challenge with the chatbot is content, because the more content you're able to feed the bot, the smarter the bot gets and can reply to a variety of different questions and scenarios.
Sure.
Now, in a greenfield implementation, when you're starting off new, you don't have enough content to feed the bot.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is you start off with a simple bot that is not intelligent in the beginning, but you still continue to capture the questions that customer asks.
Yeah.
So for example, on day one, when you start the bot, if I ask a sophisticated question, the bot will just tell me, sorry, I don't understand it. Please choose one of the options below or something like that.
Sure. And that could be like routing them to a support person or...
Yeah, exactly. But what you do is you capture these questions in the backend and save them so that a month later you have enough input to feed this to the bot and make it smarter.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the other crucial thing is to constantly keep listening to your customers. So whether it's through the standard support channels like cases and so on, or social media listening, these things play an important role.
Yeah, sure.
So like over a period of, so what we did in the previous project is every fortnight, we collected all the posts from social media, we collected all the posts from the cases, consolidated them into different categories, and fed this to the bot.
Okay.
So every 2 weeks, the bot was being trained with newer input and making it smarter.
Sure. And how important is it for the user at the other end of the bot to know that they're speaking to a bot?
I think it's very important. So one of the best practices is make it very clear that you're talking to a bot.
Yeah.
So do not try to outsmart a human and make things ultra cool, because let the user know that it's a bot, and the messaging should be very clear.
Yeah, sure.
And the messaging should also be clear that there are only this amount of tasks that are capable by the bot, and beyond that you would require human intervention.
Sure. Yeah, I remember once I was replying to someone's email, and they'd asked me to schedule a time, and I was like, this is cool. Like, I didn't know they had a PA. And it was only when I saw like replying to Evie or something at the bottom, it was like it was a tool. And it said it on there, but otherwise, the whole time I would have just thought I was engaging with a real person. So yeah, I think it's good to know who you're talking to or what you're talking to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing with the other advantage of Salesforce bots is you build the bot once, but you can roll it out on multiple channels. So the customer can chat with the bot on the channel of their choice. So whether it's from a browser or SMS or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, it will still be the same bot and same conversation flow, but you have the flexibility to chat in your channel of choice.
So even WhatsApp?
WhatsApp is still not generally available, but as of now, it's SMS, Facebook, and browser, like chat. These are available. Yeah.
So it sounds to me like the hardest part about rolling out a Salesforce bot isn't the configuration or the build of the bot; it's the data. So, what kind of skills do you need on a project if you're going to implement a
bot? So I think in terms of configuration, the skills are easy to learn from Trailhead. So those skills are not going to be the hard part. But I think you need someone with content experience, like content producer or people who've been in the knowledge article content producing space. So it's very important to keep all your content on the website up to date. Like I'm guessing any company where you have a bot, you'll also have a help portal with knowledge articles and so on. And the key is also to integrate the bot with your knowledge articles. So if something is available in your knowledge article, the bot can quickly fetch that and show it to you and things like that.
Sure.
So it's about being up to date on what the customer wants out of the bot, because that can keep changing from time to time.
Sure. Now,
also one more thing is sometimes there can be false positives. So we need to be really careful about what we're feeding the bot.
Yeah.
So because you might end up asking about, I want to reset my password, and the bot might tell you something like, I can help you change your first name. So you just need to be careful on these false positives and make sure you test them and train them regularly.
Sure. So how quickly, well, I guess actually let me reframe this. So you mentioned that if you're in a greenfield environment, which you were for that specific project, you don't have the data, but is it easier then to implement a bot if you've got, if you've been using Salesforce for a number of years, you've got a huge amount of data?
It's easier definitely to start with a non-intelligent bot, like greenfield. And what we saw was even after just 4 weeks, we had a decent amount of content to feed the bot. Now, even let's say even if it's not a greenfield implementation, let's say it's a Salesforce implementation where you've heavily been using case management and you have hundreds of thousands of customer cases in your system. Now, the text in all these cases will serve as input to the bot. So the real skill or work required here is analyze these cases, what type of text and description they are on these cases, categorize them into the different categories, and then feed these to the bot.
Sure.
So that can be done even for non-greenfield environments where you already have enough content.
Okay.
The example where I worked on it was a brand new product, so we had no content or we didn't know what to expect.
Sure.
But if you already have been doing support case and channels, you will have a lot of content, but it's just about organizing this content for the bot.
Sure. Okay, cool. Now, moving away from bots, and you spoke about the kind of skill sets that are required for them, but now I know that you have been quite active in the past around hiring developers and interviewing developers.
Right.
What do you look for when you're hiring a developer?
I mean, basically, the biggest thing I look for is flexibility. I mean, I know every developer has their preferences, like they might have strengths in Apex only or Lightning component only or things like that. But I think when it comes to development in Salesforce, you need to be able to have the flexibility to wear multiple hats.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you can't say, I will do Apex only or I will do Lightning components only. So, what I'm looking for is flexibility and like willingness to learn new things, staying up to date, because Salesforce keeps introducing new things once a quarter, right, with their releases.
Sure.
And you really need to stay up to date because what probably required thousands of lines of code last year will be a new feature in Salesforce this year, and it's obsolete.
Yeah.
So more than skill in a specific thing, I'm looking for this sort of, staying up to date, being flexible, willing to accept any work that is thrown to them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And what other Salesforce products are really interesting you right now, away from the bots again, but what kind of has got your attention?
So I think what I'm excited about is now Salesforce is slowly trying to go more open standards from being a niche industry or niche skills. So previously you would hire a guy with only Apex experience and not somebody with some other technology for a Salesforce developer.
Sure.
But now they've introduced something called Evergreen in Dreamforce, which they are trying to explore, like using open standards like Java, Node.js, going more microservices based, or Lightning Web Components is a great example where they move from Salesforce specific in-house technology to open web standards. And they're also introducing something called Customer 360 now, which is they have something called the Cloud Information Model, which is an open standard also used by AWS and Linux and so on. So I think this is huge because you don't need to look for Apex or Aura component developers anymore. So if somebody is really proficient in Node.js or Java, they can still do Salesforce stuff.
Sure, that's really interesting because like I'm aware of that obviously, and I see a lot of clients that are looking for developers that are broader than just Salesforce. So like for a lot of my clients now, they're looking at someone that isn't just tied to the Salesforce platform. Might have built microservices in Node.js, like you said, or just has an appreciation for broader technology. But I still feel that a lot of Salesforce developers are still very much tunnel vision Salesforce development. And yes, they need to learn. The only reason they're perhaps learning JavaScript is because they want to build web components, or they know they're going to need to. But I don't feel that many Salesforce developers are taking the view that they can broaden their skill set outside of just the Salesforce platform.
Yeah, so I think the challenge comes with the type of gig you're on and the project you're on, right? So if you're swamped with 5 days a week of heavy Salesforce development, sometimes you don't get the room to learn new things or broaden your skill set also.
Sure.
So with some projects, the developers have the benefit of getting into something new and learning something new.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like I still know developers who are working in projects that are still classic and no Lightning.
Yeah.
And the only time they get is weekends to brush up on Lightning with Trailhead and so on.
Sure.
So it's difficult for them to show hands-on experience with this because they are just stuck in that kind of a project. So it really depends on the initiatives and the projects and companies and all those things.
Sure, because we've just done our survey for the year, and we'll be announcing the results soon. One of the questions that we asked developers was, "Do you feel that the role should be split between kind of front and back end?" And the overarching response was no. Like it should be a full stack kind of developer. So, do you now think that a developer should know front end, back end, but also like deployment, delivery, that kind of stuff as well?
At least with Salesforce, I feel a developer should know front end and back end. We shouldn't be making the distinction. So it's different when you making it is different when it comes to heavy UX specific styling and all those things. That's different.
Yeah.
So a developer can still do the front end and the back end, and then you can get a UX specialist to just style the stuff and make it fancy.
Sure.
That's different. But apart from that, yes, it's also important for developers to know deployment strategies and branching strategies with source control systems and all these things. I understand it for smaller projects with teams of just 5 or 6 people, this is usually not followed.
Yeah.
But in bigger setups like where I work right now, we have 30 different developers committing to the same org.
Sure. Yeah,
so
it
it's
gets
a
messy.
huge, it's a massively complex setup we have.
Sure.
So it's important to know the basics at least on branching patterns and how source control works and continuous integration works and these things.
And having been in the ecosystem for 12 years, has branching always been something that people should be aware of? Because I get the sense that's now becoming more prominent, and clients are asking more questions around that in interviews than ever before.
No, that is true. Like I think only in the last 2 to 2.5 years, it's gaining more popularity and people are asking for that knowledge. Because like up to 2015, 2016, when I worked on different projects, we barely even mentioned these things,
Sure.
branching strategies and source control and so on.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So I think with the DX paradigm shift, these are gaining more. These are more relevant.
Yeah.
Going down the DX road. Yeah.
Sure. So what keeps you engaged? Like you've been in the market for a long time. What keeps you happy and content in the Salesforce world?
The biggest things that always keeps me happy is constant innovation and change. Like Salesforce, when I started in 2008, it was only Sales Cloud and a little bit of Service Cloud, nothing else.
Yeah.
And if you see now the acquisitions, the innovations they come out with every Dreamforce or every release, it's this constant change that keeps me motivated. It's not, there's never the monotony with Salesforce.
Sure.
New things keep coming every quarter.
Yeah. So safe to say you won't be going back to SAP.
Definitely not. No way.
Yeah, I gathered that was the case. Well, look, thank you so much for today. It's really good to catch up with you as always, Suri, and I'll let you go before the baby wakes up.
Thank you.
But yeah, all the best. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.